Hey team, welcome back. So now that we have set up our routes, the next thing that we're going to work on is actually turning our add project component into our controlled component. Now I'm just going to explain what a control component is in the context of what we're doing. Okay, so what we're going to do to turn our add project component into a controlled component is that we're going to link all the value, and this is a keyword here, the value in our input fields, we're going to link it to the component's state. So basically, when we render this component, we're going to give it an initial value, and then we're going to set up a function to handle the changes in the value. Now, as you remember, the state is immutable. However, we can use the API set state, which we're going to use in this video, to set a new state for the input field. Then what's going to end up happening is that when we're done typing or filling out our form, what we're sending on to our server, to our SpringBoot server, is going to be the whatever value we had in the state in each of the input fields. Okay, so there's going to be some wiring up here, and this lesson might be a little extensive, so just bear with me. So the first thing that we want to do before we do anything here is that we want to bring up our form, our design, and then we're going to do some JSX cleanup. So excuse me. As I mentioned before, we're going to do very little HTML and CSS coding. So if you go to the branch in this video, you can find the project form.html, and you can literally guide yourself using the comments here: start of project form and end of project form, and then just go ahead and copy and paste everything between those comments. Please exclude the comments, okay? So now that we do this, we're going to just grab that and paste it right here. And then the first step that we're going to take is to clean up some stuff. So we're going to get rid of this comment here. And then we're going to get rid of the disabled attribute here, because as you know, we can set up a project identifier whenever it's a new project, but we cannot change that. So when we work on the update form, then at that point we're gonna want to have that attribute. But anyway, it's not important right now. So now that we have this, we are going to, before we do anything, we're going to do the cleanup of the class. We're gonna change the class attribute to class name, which is what JSX needs. Remember, do not change. Make sure that you don't change this when you do that keyword combination. And now that we have that in place, when we come here, we can see that from the dashboard, if we click create project, it brings us to the form that we just copy and pasted here. Cool. So the next thing that I want to do is just clean this up, create project form, because we're not editing here. And now let's go ahead and follow the steps that I laid down here for you. So first thing that we're going to do is that we're going to check that the name attribute in the input fields is actually correct. How are we going to do that? Okay, the next thing that we're going to do, I keep saying the first thing, and then what's the second thing, right? So the next thing that we're going to do, that I want to do, because I really want this to do this in the context of this project, because I know that for some of you, this is the first time that you're actually hooking up a front end with a back end, right? And so I really want this to make a lot of sense. As you remember, when we were using Postman and when we were actually sending information or creating project objects on Postman, we had to make sure that the attributes match whatever name we declared in the project object. And remember, those are actually case sensitive, so they have to match to a T. So the first thing that we need to do is that on each input field, we need to have the name attribute, and the name attribute needs to match to a T with the name that we gave it on the server, on the project object. And remember, this form is to create a new project object. So we need to match this like to a T. It cannot be different case, nothing. It has to be perfect. Okay. And we're just gonna do this here, and I'm gonna do it one by one because I don't want to leave anything to chance. And sometimes these things are tedious, but since I know it is the first time for some of you to actually building a full stack application called an API, we do have to respect the contract, right? And the contract is actually passing the parameters with the same name that we've described in our object. Okay. And I actually did myself a favor in the past and did it for start date and end date, so we don't have to do those. Perfect. Okay, so now that we have that out of the way, and this is a very important piece here, so make sure that you do this exactly as I did it. We're going to create a constructor, and in the constructor we're going to set up our initial state. Now, since we're extending the component class, we need to call super here too. If you don't do this, it's going to give you an error. We don't need to pass any parameters here. Usually, and for those of you who have perhaps followed some tutorials online, you'll see that it passes props sometimes here. But we're not going to do anything with props, at least not at this very second. So we're going to leave that out for now. And as I mentioned, a control component sets an initial state for the input fields, and then allows for we create a function that then allows us to update the state. So we're gonna set up an initial state for all of our input fields, which we already declared, or we already gave a name attribute to. A good shortcut for this that I like to use is that I like to go back to Postman, and actually this is a really nice shortcut here. So as you know, guys, these are all the attributes that we created on the project object, but we are not passing all of them when we create a project object. The only ones that we need to pass on to the server are these attributes here, which are the same ones that we have on the form. And remember, only 3 of these are actually mandatory, but we have to enable the form to pass them all. So a good thing that I like to do to save me some time and to save me from some typos is that I literally get that JSON response there, and this way we're respecting the contract. And as I mentioned before, what we want to do is we want to make sure that when we render the form is completely blank, because this is to create a new project object. This is not to update. Now, when we update, then at that point, you're going to want to load it, but that's another story. Now that I saved, I'm pretty sure that you noticed that Prettier got rid of the double quotes because we don't really need them here. And this is why I told you guys to go and install those extensions that I recommended you to install, because Prettier will take care of things like that for you. And, you know, it makes things so much cleaner. So anyway, if you don't have Prettier, make sure that your state looks like this one, all right? So now that we have this, the next thing that we want to do is to set the value attribute on each one of the input fields to what's on the state for that specific input field. So basically what we're doing is value this.state.project name. So basically we're telling React that this input field should have the state that we're setting here, right? And this is why this needs to match this and this, as well as what's on the project object. All right, so this is very, very, very important, and I'm stressing a lot. I'm stressing this a lot because it's gonna cause headaches if you are not careful with this piece of the or with this part of the lecture. Okay, and then same thing with the project identifier. Actually, I'm pretty sure that a lot of you type a lot faster than I do, so go ahead and do this on your own. You know exactly what we're doing here. Value. Sorry about that, folks. And let me see that I did it. Yeah, value. Remember, we're setting the value to whatever's on the component's state. Okay, so just make sure that you're not incurring into any typos here. Take your time. Sometimes when we try and go too fast, then we end up going slower because then we have to clean up our own messes, and that doesn't help anyone. It certainly doesn't help you. And then, oops, see? This is the start date, okay? So just make sure that the value and the name are at par. Value and date. Perfect. I'm sorry, value and name. Okay, so now that we have this in place, you're gonna notice something. And that something is that you cannot no longer type, or you can no longer provide any inputs on your form. And actually, I need to save this. And then as you can see, we cannot type anything. And it's because this input field is tied to the state, which right now is blank. And you cannot, and remember, the state is immutable. The only way to change the state is to set a new state, which is what we're going to do next. So what we're going to do next is that we're going to set up an onChange function. And this onChange function takes an event parameter. Now, there are two ways of using this onChange function. There's the, say, the beginner's way, and there's a more advanced way that actually saves you some time. So we're going to just do this for the project name because I don't want to spend too much time teaching you basics. Again, this is our project course. We're building our project and we're learning React in the context of what we need to build the project. Okay, so for this we're going to use this.setState. Okay, so we have the state to set an initial state, and then you have the set state to set a new state. All right, I hope that that makes sense. And the long way of doing this is that you grab the name, right? The name in the name attribute, and then you tie it up to the event target dot value. So basically, on the target, which is this, right? The name, the project name, on that target, take whatever value. And I'm going to show you how that looks like now. Oh, sorry. But before we do this, before this works, then you have to also bind the function to the input field. So we're going to do this onChange equals this dot onChange dot bind to this. And you have to bind then this onChange function to the input field. And basically that completes the cycle, and you can type here again, but you cannot type on the others. Perfect. So again, as I mentioned before, this is the long way of doing it, because then you'd have to do this for each one of the input fields. But there's a shortcut to this. And the shortcut is to basically type it down in the following way. Get rid of this, open brackets, as in like an array, and then type e.target.name. And then what this is going to do is that this is not actually calling the name, this name here is actually saying on whatever name, take whatever value and set it to the state as a new state. All right. And then of course, you do have to then bind this to each one of the input fields. And if I save this, it works here. It doesn't work here. Because I still have to bind this to the other input fields. Now, there's a long way and a short way of doing this. The long way would be to copy and paste this to each one of the input fields, but I much rather bind them at the constructor level. And all you have to do is, at the constructor, type this dot onChange equals this dot onChange bind this. And with this in place, excuse me, I'm coming down with a cold. Now if it works. All right. So the only thing that's left for us to do is to copy paste this and actually bind this function onto each one of our input fields, and then everything's gonna work like a charm. Okay. All right. Perfect. So now with this in place, you should be able to change all of this without a problem. Remember I told you that I need you to use Chrome and that I needed you to actually add two extensions. This is when the React extension comes in handy, because now if I go to the component that we have loaded here, which is the add project, then we can use this to make sure that when we set the state, we're actually setting the state at the component level. And you can see, as you can see, this works. And also we're getting the props from the React router. I know that we haven't talked about props just yet, but whenever you get a component rendered from a route that was set up as a route using the React router DOM, then it always passes 3 props. And this is a good way to extract parameters whenever we need parameters, which we are going to need. All right. But enough of this. We're gonna talk about this later on. So now we have a fully functional form, and I think we should test it. Okay. And we're gonna test this by pre-wiring the onSubmit form. Okay. So for those of you that are familiar with the basics of HTML, you should know by now that you always have to give the form an action. And in this case, the action is going to be binding an onSubmit function to it, so that whenever we click submit, it actually calls the function. Okay? And we're going to wire this function up now. It's basically going to be onSubmit. That's the name that we're going to give it. We're going to pass it an event parameter. And then inside of this function, we're going to create a new project object, which is a project object that we're going to pass on to our server. And basically this project object will work with these parameters here, which is exactly what we need to pass on to our server. But the only thing is that when we submit, we're going to take the value, this.state.project name, we're going to take the value on each one of the input fields that is currently in our state, which is basically when the user is done typing and click submit, you're going to take those values. So I'm pretty sure that you, again, know where this is going, and I'm pretty sure that you want to also do this on your own. And I'll stay quiet for a little bit, save my voice, because right now my throat is not doing very well. Sorry, I'm not a fast typer. I type super slow, and there you have it. Okay, so now it says that onSubmit is not defined. What does that mean? Well, it means, actually I have to change this. It means that, well, first I had to do this, but I also have to bind it, just like I binded the onChange. And I have to bind it to the form so it actually works. So whenever I actually click the submit button, it actually calls this function on this instance of the component. Now with this in place, we should be able to fill out the form, and we should it should actually send it somewhere, or actually create that new project object. But what's going to happen is that it's not going to do that. It's going to do something else, and it's going to refresh. And we didn't get the project object, and everything goes away. The reason for this is that the way it works is that when you submit, it refreshes the page. We don't want that for 2 reasons. First of all, because that's not the functionality we want, plain and simple. But second of all, because if we have errors, we want to display what those errors are, as you saw on the demo. And for that, we cannot have the application refresh. We actually need to just update the state of the form rather than resubmitting it. So for this, we're going to use something that's literally vanilla JavaScript, e.prevent default. And what this is going to do is that it's going to prevent the form from reloading. And then now, with that in place, I want to console log our new project object and literally grab that project object that we created here in React and manually send it to our backend through Postman, just to see the entire flow. Because right now we need to put Axios in the middle, which is the library that's gonna make those API calls. But since we are not there yet, I am going to act as the intermediary here between my React application and my Spring Boot application. So now that we save these changes, we're gonna go back to our form, project from React, description. And by the way, while I do this, you guys can go ahead and fire up your Spring Boot server and get Postman too, because we're gonna use it. And now we have a valid object here, this is basically what React is going to be sending back to Spring Boot through Axios once we're done wiring that piece up. And if you don't believe me, I'm going to show you right now. And I was actually doing some offline testing here, so ignore that. Basically, I'm going to paste that object that I got from our console. And at this point, all I need to do is make sure that it's a valid JSON object. For this, I need to highlight the attributes and surround them by double quotes, which is the proper JSON syntax. And with this in place, and with our Java server running, I'm just gonna make sure that it's running. Yes, it is. I'm just gonna refresh it real quick because I was testing this. And with our Java server running, we can create our new object. And there you have it. Perfect. So basically, this is exactly what we're gonna be passing on to our server from React, and this is really good, and this is really exciting because we're coming closer to actually hooking these two up. And I know that for those of you who's their first time doing a project like this, I know that you're mighty excited and you want me to shut up and just get on to the next lecture. So anyway, this works, validation works, so it's all good. So in the next lecture, I am going to talk a little bit about the architecture and some of the important considerations now that we're moving forward to more complex things. I know that you guys are here to code and not to hear me talk, but please bear with me on the next lecture. It's really important information that I'm going to give you that's going to give you a lot of context on Redux if this is your first time actually working with Redux. See you then. Thank you.